Okay, we're on the air live with one of our famous contributors and friends, Murray Hayes out of Scotland. We're talking about lapse rate, convergences, and some of the things that relate to how to spot a good flying day. So hang on with us. We're going to be right back with Murray, and the rest of you, if you have any questions, can call in. We'll be right back, so stay tuned.
Paraglider Magazine presents Paraglider Radio. And now your hosts, David and Gabriel Jebb.
And Murray with us right now, one of our third hosts today. We're back with the Paragliding Show. Murray, you're still with us, I take it?
I am indeed.
Okay, my dad and I were talking. I think we're going to switch the subject a little bit. How do we recognize turbulence before we launch? What can we look for in the sky, maybe on the ground? Dad, what are your thoughts?
Let's start off with some universal signs, because, Murray, it may be a little bit different in your neck of the woods. Murray's calling in from Scotland, and it's good to get a European perspective. Here we have some very easy signs, because we have oftentimes when we're standing at launch, we have to make some assessments of, gee, what's the air going to be like out there? How do I know if it's going to be a smooth day, whatever? Maybe, Murray, maybe you have some ideas you want to throw out.
The first thing, which is pretty well available in all the sort of the modern world areas, fair enough if you're in the back of beyond, or you're doing a bivouac flight, this doesn't apply. But for everybody else, it's actually not the case of doing quite that. It's the night before, it's earlier that day, it's looking at the aviation, not the general forecast, but the aviation-specific weather forecast, where they're actually forecasting for different layers above the ground. Now, in the UK, we've got very good Met Office here. Outlook for today: moderate low-level turbulence developing in the southwest, otherwise little change. Says it straight away. You've got information about the area of the sky which you're going to be flying in, and as I said before, it's four-dimension. It's not just where you're positioned, it's how high you're going to be, and it's what time you're going to be there at.
Absolutely.
So the key is, even before you go out to fly, look at those things, subscribe to them. $50 a year or whatever, it's worth it in safe fuel. Even if you're paying the fuel that you pay in America rather than the fuel here,
right,
it's still got to be worth it. I mean, I've flown 450 days in the last 5 years, and I've had less than 20 days when I've not flown and I've gone out.
Right.
I just don't go out if the forecast's not right.
Having said that, though, I do believe that there is some
merit. Then you've got to use the Mark 1 eyeball.
Right. There is some merit in being able to look up in the sky and tell what's going on.
Absolutely vital.
And so,
the forecast only forecast, is not what's happening.
Right. So what are some of the things we're going to look for that may indicate turbulence and not good flying weather, or not a good time to be up in the air? Well,
your first thing is clearly, unless it's CAT, clear air turbulence, cloud types, what they're doing, whether they're shear levels. And one of the hard things to do when you're in the sky is actually judging how the clouds are moving.
Absolutely.
But the shadows are moving in relation to the ground. So if you're looking down when you're flying and it's been a nice day, it's maybe starting feeling there's something changed. And you look down at the shadows, and the shadows are not moving in the same direction. You've got clouds at one height, their shadows moving that way. The clouds near your height, they're moving another way. Somewhere near you, there's wind shear. There's two air masses moving in different directions. And by looking at the ground and the shadows, you can tell.
Absolutely. Gives you some perspective. Another one that's really simple for me, and this is probably one of the biggest lessons I've ever learned. I've never had a good day of flying when I haven't seen birds out flying before I launch. And I've been to some sites where, you know, I looked and I'm like, it's going to be perfect today. And I get out there and I go, oh my God, I should not be up here right now, or, you know, complete washout.
I haven't ever heard of that, but now that you've mentioned it, that's a very good prediction, because I can relate. I understand that.
And you've got a lot of kestrels and whatnot in your neck of the woods, Murray. Have you noticed that?
Hundreds of them.
When you're out flying, they're out flying. But when you're not flying, they're not flying either.
When they're not flying, I'm training.
Right. So that's probably one that holds around the world.
One of my favorite ways of telling when you're standing at launch is to get your wind meter out and start to assess the gust factor. In other words, the difference between base temperature and the peak,
base
wind, and the peak airflow or wind speed. So talk a little bit about that. That's a simple one, but it's an easy one that will hold true in Europe, here, everywhere.
Well, without doing the math on it again, because I think we did too much of that today, you can actually break down what each mile per hour wind or what each meter a second of wind is going to be in terms of lift based on the differential in the gust and things like the slope angle. So probably the easiest thing, again, without getting into the math, is I've gone out on days where it was gusting 12 miles an hour and I was comfortable with that. But I've been out on days where it was gusting 15 miles an hour and I wasn't comfortable in that. Probably just a good idea to keep in your logbook what the max gust rate was, so that you know, I like to fly in 12, I'll fly when it's 12 or less, and I don't like to fly in 15. So that's just a real simple one. If you want to, I don't want to do that.
But basically, simply what we're saying is the bigger the difference between the base wind and the gust factor, usually there's more turbulence associated with it.
Absolutely.
Right,
Yeah.
Murray?
Yeah, so I mean, if you have a wind that's gusting 10 miles an hour with a base of, say, 8 miles an hour, that's probably not too bad if you're an experienced pilot.
Right.
But if the base is 0 and it's gusting 10, you've got major problems.
You've got some big problems.
Okay. Okay, and so another thing that's famous for at least the Southern California area for looking at and deciding if it's going to be turbulent are dust devils. These are little miniature tornadoes that hop up from the ground from time to time. We see them a lot in the Southern California region.
It's really dry.
Basically,
very arid. Yeah.
right. And I don't know if you have dust devils in Scotland.
Well, they don't have dust.
Very occasionally, but not often.
Yeah.
You tend to do a lot of looking out over the River Tay or looking over at the lochs, seeing what the patterns are on the water in front, looking for smoke drifts, looking for things in the distance, 5-10 miles away from you. That's where you want to be looking, because that's the weather that is going to be arriving where you are in 10 minutes, in 20 minutes, in half an hour.
Okay, so
it's not your local environment, it's the surroundings.
So in Scotland, you have water spouts, not dust devils.
you know, we last week when it was so windy, we had a bunch of water spouts
Right.
that day. It was amazing.
These are very interesting phenomenon, because if you're standing out over a lake, a water, an ocean, and to watch these little miniature, looking like tornado type things come up from the water, from the ground, it's pretty amazing. And we hear a lot of the pilots that fly up in Chelan, up in northern Washington, riding these things several hundred meters above the dust devils, getting thrown up into the clouds and so on. So there's a lot of lift under them or over them, but in them and around them, it's pretty turbulent. And it would probably be very turbulent above them as well. Okay, any other signs that you might look for, Murray?
Well, we have the obvious advantage being licensed to talk to air traffic control. We've got half a dozen people within 50 miles of us that are constantly reporting the weather. Every time a plane's landing or taking off at the airport, they get the weather reports, and specifically they're getting the wind direction. We keep an eye out for that. We've got one radio set to monitor the main airports who we're talking to, and we can then call them up and ask them what their gust factor is.
And I was privy to this, and I saw this happen when we were out there flying the first day, Murray, and the radio reported that we're going to have rain in about 20 minutes, and sure enough, within
we did.
5 minutes of that, we had rain. You know, so.
Yeah, but the other key thing is training. The more you train, if it's not a flyable day, you go to a flat site with, say, a 10-foot high ridge. If it's gusty, whatever, you do a lot of ground handling, you do a lot of training. Now, northerlies on the south side of the Tay are always turbulent. It's guaranteed. And I was flying the flying the Argon the other day, and had about 70% deflation at about 80 feet. And I recovered it, not using more than about 2 inches of brake, just using the weight shift, with still 20 feet clear of the gorse bushes. It's training. I didn't look up at the wing once.
Good stuff, man.
Right now, Murray, we have an unusual condition here called the Santa Ana condition, and it's where the winds actually blow in the complete opposite direction than they normally do. And
I've been checking your site.
Right.
Have you seen the weather map, the pressure map this morning, Murray?
Not today's for there, but I've been looking at it for the last few weeks and sort of thinking, you guys are not getting a lot of flying at the moment.
No, last week we had it way too windy. You know, and it was blowing on shore. It was blowing, one day it was blowing like 35, 40 miles an hour.
Yeah, I saw that day.
Well, but basically, the only point that I was making with today's wind condition, there's a lot of turbulence associated with it. So again, when you have a totally 180-degree switch in wind, oftentimes that's going to create a little bit less than desirable situation. And here in San Diego with this condition, the wind speeds and the gust factor very, very high.
Perfect day for going out doing some kiting with an old glider in a flat field.
Yeah, we usually on these kind of days we don't let people kite at Torrey because of the danger of them getting blown off a
You've got a cliff.
350-foot cliff.
Yeah, that's not odd, but I mean, flat field away from a cliff.
Okay, so I think we've come up with some good ideas for spotting turbulence, and to kind of just summarize, we've talked about the aviation forecast, the cloud
Pre-planning.
type, the cloud types, pre-planning, flying birds, the gust factor, dust and water spouts, just to name a few. So you could be standing at launch looking and considering all of these factors before you make the decision to fly, which will greatly help your enjoyability factor and your fun factor in flying.
That's about it for the show today. Murray, thanks for the call. Thanks for the help,
Pleasure as always.
It's been a pleasure, yeah. Take care of yourself this week, get some airtime. And to our listening audience, thank you for tuning in once again. Next week's going to be real exciting. Mad Mike Kung, world-famous
On the
Aqua
20th.
pilot.
On the
2
20th.
weeks.
Yeah.
So send us questions. And this is WSRadio.com and the Paragliding Internet Radio Talk Show signing off.